listen, just one more thing.
Hello there. Welcome to my review of episode 4 of season 3 of Columbo, Double Exposure. First broadcast on the 16th of December 1973 on NBC. This episode was written by Stephen J. Cannell. Cannell was born on February the 5th, 1941 in Los Angeles. He struggled with dyslexia at a young age when so little was known of the condition, but still managed to graduate with a degree in journalism. He sold his first script in 1968 for It Takes a Thief, and quickly moved on to other Universal shows such as Ironside and this episode of Columbo. After quickly building a healthy reputation, he went on to create or co-create Chase, The Rockford Files and Beretta in the 70s, amongst others. He then created his own production company, which any viewer of the A-Team will recognise from its ident at the end of every episode. As well as the A-Team, his company would go on to produce numerous shows, including Hunter and 21 Jump Street. In the 90s, as well as continuing to produce shows, he would turn to acting as the villain in the series Renegade. He would also appear as himself in episodes of Castle, up until his death on September the 30th, 2010, at the age of 69. It was directed by returning director Richard Quine. The episode begins at Keppel Industries, in the office of Dr. Bart Keppel, played by Robert Culp, in his final appearance in the original run of the show, but not his final appearance in a Columbo episode. It might take me a while to get to that episode, but then it took Culp 17 years to return, so be patient. Keppel is attaching something to his gun. He straightens a lampshade, then puts his gun back in its case. He checks a tape player in a cinema and then goes to the projection room and begins cutting images of a soft drink into a roll of film of a desert. Culp's silent performance is excellent. He really looks like he knows what he's doing when he's using the equipment and does it with a confidence that looks genuine. This is something he brings to all his Columbo appearances, complete confidence in whatever role he's playing. Even though I wasn't a big fan of his previous episodes, I can't fault him as an actor who's really worth your attention. Keppel is interrupted by the projectionists, but manages to hide what he was doing and leaves to make a phone call. He puts on a funny voice to speak to a Mrs. Norris, claiming to be Tanya Baker's boyfriend and that Tanya is having an affair with Mr. Norris. He tells her they're together at that moment and he wants to meet her to take her to them to prove it. This is of course a lie because he's pretending to be somebody else. Mrs. Norris is played by Louise Latham. Mr. Norris arrives at Keppel Industries to attend a group screening of a promotional film and calls Keppel out on his scheme to blackmail him, after setting him up with Tanya and taking some compromising photos. While he's there, he has some caviar before attending the screening. Keppel explains to the group that there's no narration on the film yet, so he will provide it. He goes behind the screen to do this, and after a short while begins his tape recording, which continues his narration. He sneaks out to watch the CCTV, and the combination of the caviar and the subliminal image of the soft drink causes Vic Norris to leave to get a drink. As he is at the water fountain, Keppel calls to him and shoots him. He rushes back to his office, removes the device from his gun and puts the gun back in its case. He then hides the device in his lamp and gets back to the screening just in time to take over the narration from the tape. For me, this is the perfect start to a Columbo. We know most of what's going on, the motive, the scheme, and the building of the alibi, but there are still one or two things that aren't fully explained, still giving us a little mystery. It's compact and concise and seems like a perfect murder, so how is Columbo going to crack it? The body is discovered and Keppel uses the opportunity to record over his narration. In the next scene, Columbo is on the case. A couple of sergeants relay some information as Columbo helps himself to the caviar.
That's delicious.
Ought to be. Costs $80 a jar.
$80?
Yeah.
Oh. I must have got $15 worth right in my mouth.
Columbo wonders how the murderer knew Norris would be in the corridor at that precise moment. He then speaks to Keppel about the tape player and what it is that Keppel does. He then goes on to speak to the projectionist, Roger White, played by Chuck McCann. Columbo sees the monitor that Keppel was tinkering with earlier and asks if it was on and if Roger saw the murderer. Roger says it wasn't and he didn't. Columbo also asks for a drink.
I don't know why I'm so thirsty.
Yeah.
Oh.
He then asks to see the film that was showing, but it's already been returned to the vault. He then spots a nickel on the floor, and Roger explains it's a trick he uses. He lodges it in the reel, and when the reel is coming towards the end, he knows to change the reel without having to watch the film when the nickel hits the floor. Columbo returns to Keppel and mistakenly calls him Mr. rather than Doctor for the second time. He might just be doing it on purpose. He spots the guns and Keppel tells him he's welcome to inspect them. Keppel tells Columbo that Norris was having an affair and he suspects Mrs. Norris knew about the affair and may have killed him, which explains why he sent her on a wild goose chase to eliminate any alibi she might have had. Columbo then observes that Keppel must have enormous self-control to have sent back the film after a murder had just taken place, but is surprised that Keppel turned on the tape recorder immediately after the body had been found. Keppel excuses this away, and again, top marks for this episode. Columbo picking away at the little details, looking for holes, and possibly not finding any just yet. The film being returned is the biggest one, but not quite enough to make Keppel the favourite. Columbo then goes to see Mrs. Norris, who explains what had actually happened the night before, and Columbo believes her, because her alibi is so bad, and had she been the murderer, she would have come up with something better.
If my wife decided to murder me, she could come up with a better alibi than you got.
Thank you.
One thing the killers are always unaware of with Columbo is that he might not be absolutely certain when he's being lied to, but he is always sure when someone is telling him the truth. In the next scene, Keppel is watching Columbo on a set of monitors at a supermarket. Columbo joins him and confuses Keppel for someone who makes adverts, which he immediately corrects. It would appear Columbo's tactic is to attack Keppel's ego. He's also been researching the books Keppel has written. Columbo here is giving him the same clue he gave Ken Franklin in Murder by the Book. He's read 3 academic books on a complicated subject he knows nothing about in one evening, and Keppel just doesn't notice. Perhaps he's distracted by how fabulous he looks in his delightful yellow jacket. Columbo then pretends to be astounded by how perceptive Keppel is, even though Columbo has dangled information in front of him that he completely missed. Columbo then lets him know his guns seem to have never have been fired and are the wrong caliber, explaining what Keppel was doing with the gun in the first scene. He added a device to change the caliber. I don't know enough about guns to know if it's possible to do that and make it seem as if the guns hadn't been fired at all, so I'm fine with believing it. Columbo then asks why it appeared as if Norris was going to fire him, and Keppel explains that away as well. All of these explanations always seem fairly reasonable on the face of it, but in this case the sheer number of them is what Columbo latches on to. Columbo then asks to see the film. In the next scene, Roger is telling Keppel,
I think I know how you killed Mr. Norris.
Having seen him messing about with the CCTV monitor and then checking the film for the subliminal cut. He wants $50,000. Keppel agrees. Keppel watches Mrs. Norris leave her house, then breaks in and steals Vic Norris's gun from that house. He goes to see Roger at his second job at a movie theatre and shoots him. In the next scene, Columbo is speaking with a film editor, played by character actor George Weiner, who you might recognise from Spaceballs.
What's the matter, Colonel Sanders? Chicken?
He's explaining subliminal cuts to Columbo. A subliminal cut is where 1 or 2 frames of an image cut into a film are not noticeable to the eye, but are to your subconscious mind and makes you want whatever is on the frame. There's little evidence that subliminal cuts work at all, but if they do, then they only work if there are other primers, like Norris eating salty caviar and the screening room being too warm. So in that respect, this episode possibly gets the science right. However, it's just as likely the subliminal cut would have had no effect at all, and the other things Keppel did had far more of an impact on Mr. Norris needing a drink. Still, it makes for an entertaining premise. Keppel comes in and Columbo tells him he got the idea of subliminal cuts from one of Keppel's books. Keppel is credited with cutting an image of popcorn into a movie, making people in the audience want to buy popcorn. I mean, this is how the idea of subliminal cuts actually came about, although it was later discredited as a probable lie in order to promote the marketing company that claimed to do the subliminal cut. Columbo then asks Keppel to theorise why Norris left the screening room, and how the murderer knew when he would leave. Keppel refuses to play. Columbo then mentions he happened to steal some caviar, and it was so salty it made him want a drink. As a result, he checked whether Norris had eaten some of the caviar, and he had. Keppel then says that a combination of the caviar and a subliminal cut may have caused Norris to go get a drink, but Columbo has checked the film and there are no cuts. However, there could be a second print. Columbo then sets his trap for Keppel, telling him he thinks the killer would be too smart to leave a second print laying around. Columbo then gets a call informing him of Roger's death and informs Keppel, asking if he is willing to come to the crime scene, making it obvious to Keppel that he is Columbo's main suspect. Columbo pleads ignorance, but Keppel is not convinced. This might be the best cat and mouse between Columbo and a killer that we've seen so far. Keppel thinks he knows exactly what Columbo is up to, but Columbo is always one step ahead. It's revealed in front of Keppel that the gun was Mr. Norris's, but Columbo still refuses to believe it was Mrs. Norris. Keppel says it couldn't have been him as he was with Columbo when Roger was killed. Columbo then interrupts Keppel on the golf course, purposely irritating him while pretending to know nothing about golf, which we know isn't true from Columbo's first episode, Death Lends a Hand. He's looking for Tanya Baker. Keppel denies knowing her, but Columbo knows he's lying. Keppel claims he lied because he had an affair with Tanya, and Columbo comes out and tells Keppel he thinks he did it, and he knows how. He then tells Keppel Roger was killed before he and Columbo were together, and he knows this because there was no nickel on the floor. So Keppel was the one who changed the reel, not Roger, meaning he was killed earlier than they thought. This whole sequence is a lot of fun to watch, and the chemistry between Culp and Falk is brilliant. At a police station, we get a rare scene of Columbo talking to a colleague about exactly where he is in the case and how he doesn't have the gun. He is then struck with inspiration and grabs a police photographer to go with him to Keppel's office and shoot pictures of him looking at various things in the office. The next day, Keppel is in the screening room when he has a sudden urge to check his office for where he hid the calibration converter. As he grabs it from the lamp, Columbo surprises him and congratulates him on using the converter, which he hadn't thought of. He was lucky to find the gun and used subliminal cuts of him in various places around the office to get Keppel to go to where he had hid the converter, using his own technique against him. This is another great episode. Original concept, great plot, well paced. The clues are dealt with coherently. The performances are brilliant. A lot of time between Columbo and the suspect, which is what I like, and a clever gotcha. I mean, it's a nonsense gotcha based on what the current thinking of subliminal cuts is, but in the context of the time it was made, I'm willing to suspend disbelief. This is by far Culp's best episode, and Cannell seems to understand the fun to be had with Columbo is him pestering the murderer as much as he possibly can. It has a few unique touches, such as the scene in the police station and the subtle reference to earlier episodes, and I have a great time every time I watch it. I have to rate this as another 5 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.